about where the direction that you want to see in terms of your country and your society and your local community. And it's up to us to make sure that your voice is heard in that process. There are many people who might think that their voice doesn't matter, or their one vote will not make a difference, or perhaps that they don't need to play a role in all of these issues that we're facing. But what I would argue is this: at the end of the day, when it comes down to all the issues, the challenges, the disparities that we see, it is critical, at the very least, to say, this is where I'm hoping our democracy goes. This is where I'm placing my faith in our elected officials and other leaders. I am not seeing them as saviors. I am only seeing them as people who are going to be working towards this effort, and this is the opportunity to hold them accountable. And so I think with 2020, with the midst of a pandemic that we're all in right now, with the reckoning with racial justice, and with all of these different factors, it is going to be a historic election. And young people traditionally are counted out and are seen as, well, they're just not going to vote. And as Jennifer mentioned before, is even here at Ohio State, where we haven't voted in the numbers that we need to vote to make our voices heard. This generation has the ability to change the course of history that will echo over generations. And so I want to be a part of that historic election, but I also know that the work goes beyond just voting. We have to vote, but you also have to march and protest and have conversations, and then also implement action on the ground. And so I'm excited to be a part of this election, and there are 40 days left, and I'm ready to go.
Thank you, Kyle. All excellent reasons for voting. So you are affiliated with a charter amendment that will be on the local ballot on November 3rd. Can you tell us what is a charter amendment?
Of course. So it's a great question. So I am on the City of Columbus's working group that was appointed by the mayor to develop a civilian review board, the strategies and recommendations for a civilian review board. What this is, it's a police accountability mechanism, really a civilian oversight of police practices, and really to move towards police reform. We've long advocated here in Columbus for a civilian review board, and Columbus, in fact, is the only major metropolitan area in the country that does not have some form of independent civilian review board. And so the mayor made the decision to put this group together to come up with recommendations, things like having subpoena power to make sure that you compel officers to testify in a particular situation, things like making sure that this review board is fully funded so that it is independent and staffed and fully funded, and then can make recommendations for discipline decisions. This is one step for an additional accountability process that we need to see in this country. I mean, at the end of the day, the issues that we're seeing all across this country, especially when it comes to police violence, we need accountability. This is a moment for accountability. And so we are developing the framework right now. We're working with community leaders and city leaders all across the city to think through what the framework of this review board would look like. And then it is going to be on the ballot in November. Issue 2 is the name of the ballot initiative in November, basically to vote on that broader framework to develop this civilian review board and an independent inspector general to provide independent oversight of our police departments. It is a step towards reform. Civilian review board, independent inspector general, those alone, just like voting, those alone will not solve all the issues we face when it comes to police violence in this country, but it is a necessary step to address the fundamental failures and missteps and mistrust that we see between law enforcement and our communities. And it is something that everybody should be able to support. This is something where this is about accountability. And, you know, if you have accountable systems that make sure that everybody is doing their job and is ensuring that folks who are getting the support that they need are getting that support. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that there's independent oversight and accountability. So that is what will be on your ballot in November, issue 2. And again, it's one step in that broader effort towards reform.
Thank you, Kyle, for explaining that to us. And we know that OSU currently has two folks on the working group, and that would be yourself and one student. Why is it important for OSU to be involved with this civilian review board?
Of course. I mean, this is your community. And I think what sometimes happens in normal times, but even now, I mean, we kind of get caught up in a bubble as if Ohio State is separate from the Columbus community. But this is very much your community. We saw countless students, Ohio State students who were downtown protesting, who were getting pepper sprayed and tear gas, all these things. That it impacted students right here in Columbus, right here at Ohio State. You need to have that student voice, and that's critical. And you need to have the voice of the university to play a role in this effort, especially if you want to be a thought leader in this effort, to be able to really research and evaluate best practices of what something like this could look like. But ultimately, at the end of the day, here's the thing. We can talk about anti-racism. We can talk about social justice. We can talk about all these sorts of platitudes that are in the abstract. But when the questions actually come, what are you doing to actively address some of these issues? We need to lean in. So it means leaning in to issues around police accountability, but it also means looking internally at the university's steps that the university has taken. There have been missteps along the way at this university. Students have protested, continuing to protest about the university shortcomings. So we have to be open to that criticism, willing to address issues internally, but also making sure that people know that Ohio State is part of the greater Columbus community as well and deserves a voice.
Thank you. We definitely want to have our voice represented, and we're grateful that you are representing on behalf of the university, and that you will amplify all of our voices. Thank you so much, Kyle. If you all have questions for Kyle regarding the charter amendment, regarding the Civilian Review Board, please enter those in the chat and we'll make sure that those are responded to. So again, our additional guest this evening is Anna Wagner from OSU Votes, and Abby Carlson is going to introduce Anna. And Abby, tell us why you vote.
Yeah, so this is actually my first time voting in a general election, so I'm really excited. And I'm voting in my hometown by absentee ballot. I requested that this week, so I'm super excited. And I just wanted to thank, I'm a CPH student, I'm a junior in the sociology program for public health, so I just wanted to say thank you for hosting this, just because it is something really important, especially being in the field of public health. It's important to vote for issues that can impact advocacy and other issues that we're working in every day. Jennifer, do you want me to introduce Anna, or do you have another question?
Yes, please, just introduce Anna. Thank you, Abby.
You're welcome. So Anna is a senior.
Congratulations on your first time voting.
Oh yeah, I'm really excited.
Congratulations.
So Anna is the senior coordinator for student leadership development with OSU Votes, and she supports annual leadership programming and advises student leadership advocates. And just a little bit about OSU Votes, they are a student-led program, which is really important, I think, when looking at it. And they want to register, educate, and encourage student civic engagement on all sides of political and civic involvement across campus.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. We're going to go ahead and share that screen. There we go. So as Abby mentioned, my name is Anna. You see her and her pronouns, and I am here on the behalf of OSU Votes. Abby already talked about our mission, so she took care of this for me. But again, it is the Office of Student Life, student-led movement to register, educate, and empower the Ohio State University community to vote, and really to engage in the habit of civic engagement, even beyond just the voting process. And if you want to find out more about OSU Votes and what we're doing, our website is there on the screen. But we're going to go over quite a bit of information today, both about voter disenfranchisement and then also a little bit of train the trainer efforts in not only covering voter registration, absentee ballot, and early voting processes, but also making sure y'all have the knowledge and information you need to answer other people's questions and train them and empower them and register them. So I would love, we're going to ask for a little bit of participation tonight, so hope everyone was ready for that. If you could just pop in the chat, what do you remember about the first time you voted? What was it like? What did you feel about the process? So just any responses you have to that question, go ahead and pop them in the chat. Felt powerful, absolutely. It was easy, excited to make my voice heard. I know I was a little nervous, right? There were a couple details, proud, and we're feeling very powerful, contributing to your community. I wanted to make sure I was following all of the correct steps and correct directions. Yeah, absolutely. We start with this question because I think it's important to remember that just like what Kyle was talking about earlier, right? Voting is really casting your vote for what you hope the world is going to look like, right? So there's a lot of emotion and investment and involvement in the voting process, right? It is not a cut and dry thing. It's something that we feel a lot of real emotional feelings about. And so that is really how we ground any information when we're talking about the voting process, both for you and for people here to vote as well. So just a few things to consider before we get into some of the nuts and bolts. This is more than a presidential election. So if you vote in Franklin County, which all Ohio State students are eligible to vote in Franklin County, this November you'll be voting on congressional House members, Supreme Court, House of Reps, a variety of county officers, including the coroner, which I find is a fascinating elected official, and a variety of courts as well, right? So I think we spent a lot of time talking about a couple big names, but there are a variety of state and local officials, and it is often those state and local officials who have more of a direct day-to-day impact on your life and your experiences. So we want to make sure that you're considering all of the people you're going to be voting as you're casting your ballot. So what other things we want to talk about is voter suppression, right? Because I think this is a very important thing to be considering as we're talking about engaging in the election process, getting registered to vote, etc. So what is voter suppression? It's a strategy used to influence the outcome of an election by discouraging and preventing specific groups of people from voting. And this could look like gerrymandered districts, reducing or restricting time for early and absentee voting, increasing barriers to voter registration, intimidation, disinformation. These are all things that we have seen under the lens of voter suppression. So a little bit of history around voter suppression in the United States. It's important to note that the original US Constitution only allowed white landowning men to vote. And slowly that access continued to expand, but up until 1828, some states had laws that disenfranchised white men based on religion. Property owning requirement persisted all the way up until 1856. And then though freed Black men were denied the right to vote, even after the 14th Amendment granted them citizenship, it was the 15th Amendment that secured the right to vote. But we also know that after the 15th Amendment, we were followed up with a series of practices like poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, all trying to limit access to the polls. It's also important to note the way that disenfranchisement has applied to a variety of populations within the US. So Native Americans have historically been disallowed from citizenship, and even when they were allowed citizenship with the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act, many states and policies still prohibited Native Americans from voting. This year, 2020, is the centennial of the women's suffrage, or the 19th Amendment, that was brought about by the efforts of the women's suffrage movement. 1920, the 19th Amendment passed granting women the right to vote, but we also know that this largely only applied to white women. Asian Americans were denied the right to vote to become citizens until the 1952 McCarran-Walter Act. And up until the 23rd Amendment, citizens of Washington, D.C., which is important to note, nearly half of whom are Black, were not able to vote for the president, and they still do not have congressional representation. We did see some progress in things like the 24th Amendment, which finally made poll taxes illegal, and the Voting Rights Act that first started in 1965 and continued on through several different amendments. The 26th Amendment in 1971 also is what lowered the voting age to 18, and that is what has made so many people on this call be able to vote in this upcoming election. So we talk about history, but it's also important to note that voter suppression is still persisting to this day. Many states temporarily or permanently disenfranchise people with felonies, including Ohio. In 2003, part of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was actually struck down and weakened significantly. And since then, we've seen a strong increase in voter suppression tactics, such as voter purging and strict voter identification laws. Ohio is actually considered to have one of the strictest series of voter identification laws in the country. We also saw even in the primaries of this year, everything that was happening in Kentucky, both in Louisville and Lexington, they only had one polling location open, even though those are the state's two largest cities and home to the majority of Kentucky's Black residents. This resulted in extremely long wait times at the polls and a variety of people being turned away, which it's actually illegal. As long as you're in line before the polling location closes, you must be allowed to vote. We also know in the Georgia 2020 primary, there were delayed or absent absentee ballots. There's a variety of examples of people who were actually on the ballot who never received their ballot, as well as a variety of issues with poll workers. And this is something that we're also concerned about even with this 2020 November election, because it's important to remember that a lot of poll workers are typically over the age of 65 because retirees have a little bit more access to spending their whole day as a poll worker. But they're also a high risk category for people at risk for COVID-19. And so we're seeing a lack of poll workers causing longer wait times, less polling locations. All of these things are resulting in restricting access and the right to vote, which is why it is so important to make sure that you are registered and you're enacting your right to vote and you're making your voice heard and you're helping your peers make their voices heard as well. So why, given all of this information, why do you think I sort of spieled all of this history of voter suppression at you all? So again, if you could pop in the chat, why does this history of voter suppression matter when we're talking about engaging in the 2020 election? Any thoughts or reactions to why the history of voter suppression matters in how we engage with the contemporary election? Yeah, it can change the outcome significantly. To know what to look for, that history informs the present, right? We talk about that as very historical, but actually there's a lot of things that are happening regularly. The extreme impact on people of color specifically. And also Kyle made a really good point here, which we're not shocked by, about the fact that people who have been disenfranchised might feel that they can't trust the process, right? So anyone with a history of disenfranchisement for, if not only them, but an identity group that they hold to be true, may not trust the voting process generally. And yeah, it does give us a little bit of wisdom and perspective as we're imagining how do we want to create the civic world that we're hoping to engage in. So thank you all for those thoughts. So that being said, I want to transition a little bit into how to practice being an informed voter in the face of really enacting your enfranchisement. So we like to offer up that being an informed voter means to be knowledgeable about the issues and positions of candidates when voting. It means you're able to make decisions without influence from outside factors intended to persuade those who may or may not fully understand a candidate's platform or ideas. And when I read this definition, there's a few things that stick out to me. One is about being knowledgeable about issues and positions of candidates. I think particularly in US politics, we spend a lot of time talking about people and personality. And so I think I want to really highlight here that we're talking about issue and position, right? Grounding things in policy, grounding things in position, and not necessarily the person and how you feel about that person, I think is important. But then also this notion of making decisions without influence from outside factors. And I think when some people hear that definition, they say, okay, Anna, sure, that seems a little lofty. I'm sorry, I have a dog barking directly behind me too. So these are the joys of work from home. So I think it's also important to remember that you're going to have a lot of influences, right? Social media, your peers, your family, all of these things play a role in how you're going to view your political landscape. But you want to make sure that those influences are not the reason you're making your decision. They're part of a variety of inputs that you receive, and that ultimately you're able to make your own opinions and your own perspectives. So those are some reasons we think to be an informed voter. Or that's some definition of what it means to be an informed voter. I would love for you all, again, I told you we're gonna have to do a lot of participation. So could you write in the chat why you think it is important to be an informed voter? So what are some reasons that come up for you why you think it's important to be an informed voter? Yeah, the stakes are high, absolutely. We are paying these people's salaries. You are not wrong, Portia, right? Taxpayers fund public official salaries, and these policy impacts can direct our daily lives. Oh, Jennifer brought up a great point about how there are so many conflicting messages, and so we have to seek knowledge to make good decisions. We'll get into that a little bit, but absolutely, right? Understanding how to consume all the different information that's out there and really make a decision that's right for you. Thank you all. So you all hit a lot of these, but here are some of our thoughts about why it's valuable to be an informed voter. It's to know which politicians support issues you care about. I talked about this a little bit already, but again, grounding your political perspective in specific issues rather than necessarily specific people. And those certain issues can impact you or your family and friends, your community, and the country as a whole. So you really want to be making informed decisions about what and who you vote for. We also want to make sure that we're developing what we call media literacy, so the ability to spot false or misleading statements and inaccurate information, right? Looking at a headline and going, that feels a little weird, or looking at a really great, beautiful Instagram graphic that has no backing behind it in terms of X, Y, or Z company that's doing X, Y, or Z thing. So how can you ask questions and look up the next option or another news source that might help you get more sources and back things up? And then ultimately, it's just as an active and engaged citizen, it's the responsible thing to do. The motto of the university is education for citizenship, and so practicing that citizenship is super critical. So that being said, that's a really lofty goal. How are some tips and tricks of how to be an informed voter? The first is to familiarize yourself with the US Constitution, or at the bare minimum, the Bill of Rights. And I think sometimes people think I'm joking when I say this, but I'm dead serious. Read the US Constitution, or at least the Bill of Rights. We love to throw around things like First Amendment or Fifth Amendment rights. It's important to know what language is written into those amendments so you know exactly what you're debating and what you're discussing. You can also take free online tests to see which political parties or ideologies you align with. We'll throw some of those resources up in just a second. And then do your own research, right? Don't just get pamphlets or see social media posts. Learn about candidates and issues online through your own research, through the media and news, through actually talking to candidates or advocates. And then ultimately, we want you to be taking action and stay engaged before, during, and after every election. We often get a lot of fervor towards the presidential election cycles, but there is at least one, if not several elections every year. And it's important to make civic engagement generally a habit and a part of your life. So this is a slide that I always recommend taking a picture of. I'm also happy to send this to Jennifer and Caitlin to make sure that they have this and can send it out. But those are some of those political ideology quizzes that I side with is particularly great in terms of you identify issues that you're motivated by, and then it'll align it with different candidate stances. Speaking of candidate stances, definitely recommend tracking candidate stances and voting records through either GovTrack or on the issues. I think it's one thing to hear what a candidate says they do, but I think it's really even more important to understand how they've been voting. Have they actually been voting in line with the things they told you that got you excited? When it comes to polls and news, unfortunately, there is no such thing as a nonpartisan news source, but there is such thing as a relatively multi-partisan source. So the short answer to when it comes to reliable polls and news sourcing is to look at more than one source whenever possible. In terms of polls, things like Real Clear Politics, Politico, and Fact Check are all fantastic. For news, I really like to highlight NPR, generally WOSU is our more local station. And then I'm also a big fan of BBC's US coverage as well as Al Jazeera's US coverage because it's nice to have that international perspective on our domestic affairs and sort of that level of removal. But again, ultimately, I try and read news sources across a variety of different parts of the political spectrum, knowing that every news source leans in a different direction. And then that way I can sort of cobble together a full truth from all of those different pieces. The last resource that I'm highlighting here on this slide are ways to access sample ballots, so either Vote 411 or Ballotopedia. There are a lot of things that are on every ballot. Remember, we pulled up that slide earlier. I do not remember every judge that I am voting for in every election, and so it can be helpful to go through and see what we're actually preparing for before you're there and actually casting your vote. Okay, so that being said, let's talk about voter registration information, shall we? So we're invested in voter disenfranchisement and stopping that. We're invested in being informed voters. How do we do that thing? So gonna just do a couple fact or fiction questions. I'm gonna ask you to just respond in the chat if you think the statement I'm reading is a fact or a fiction. So first up, elections in the US happen every 2 years. And I kind of gave this away already. So if you were listening, you know the answer. Yeah. Amelia was our first one in. She is correct. It is a fiction. There are elections at least once a year, if not more often, between primaries, special elections, general elections, midterms. There are constantly elections to pay attention to. Every state, including Ohio, has an elections calendar on the Secretary of State's website, and that's how you can keep up with all of the elections that are coming up. Next up, in the United States, you are automatically registered to vote when you turn 18. Is that fact or fiction? Yeah, unfortunately, again, that is fiction. You do have to register to vote, and we'll talk a little bit about the voter registration process for Ohio and other states in just a bit, but it is not an automatic process. Once you're registered to vote, you must update your registration every time you move. Fact or fiction? Y'all are so smart. That is a fact. Yeah, so October 5th is the Ohio voter registration deadline. We'll talk about that in just a second. That would also include the deadline for any updates to your registration, including addresses and moving around there. And then finally, if you are an Ohio State citizen and or Ohio State student and a US citizen, you can register to vote in Franklin County. Fact or fiction? Yeah, that is a fact. All Ohio State students are eligible to vote in Franklin County using their campus address. So either their on-campus residence hall or their off-campus campus area address. This is true also for all of our regional campus students as well, not necessarily for Franklin County, but for their local county as well. And for all students, college students in Ohio for their universities. This does not mean that you have to register in Franklin County. You may have a variety of reasons, and I know we just heard from Abby too about like why she's registered still at home. Really be considering what sort of local officials, local policies do you want to make your voice heard in as you're considering where you want to be registered to vote. But Franklin County is an option for each and every one of you as long as you're a US citizen. So as far as registering to vote in Ohio goes, Ohio does have online voter registration. If you have an Ohio driver's license, you can register and check your registration online at voteohio.gov. It's very easy. We have discovered recently a fun little glitch in the system. There may be an error that you're receiving if you're trying to use the online voter registration using your campus area address. If you have not updated your address with the BMV's online system to match that same address you're using to update your voter registration, it won't accept it until you update it in the BMV's system first. So they've updated the error message to reflect that information, but if you're having an issue with that, that's what's going on there. Not to fear, if you're having issues with the online system, or if you don't have an Ohio driver's license, or if you need to change your name, you can use the paper form. You can get these at your County Board of Elections, and then OSU Votes has actually made them available all across campus. So we have them at every residence hall front desk, as well as the Ohio Union Info Desk, so the DTIX desk, the Ohio Union Resource Room, and the Hale Black Cultural Center front desks. You can find all of those locations again on our website, but you can also print them directly off of voteohio.gov, mail them in, or drop them into one of our OSU Votes drop boxes that are in some of those locations that I just mentioned. And we've been taking those to the Board of Elections once to twice a week to get those delivered for you so that you don't have to figure out how on earth to find a stamp, because that seems harder than it should be. If you're registering online for Ohio or updating your address, it's just important to note, again, you'll need that driver's license or ID card, your name, date of birth, address, and the last 4 digits of your social. And these are the qualifications in Ohio. So US citizen, at least 18, on or before the general, a resident of Ohio for at least 30 days, not incarcerated in jail or in prison for a felony conviction. If you are detained in jail awaiting trial, you are still eligible to vote in Ohio. And you have not been declared incompetent for voting purposes by a probate court or permanently disenfranchised by violations of election law, so not committed voter fraud. And then you'll be asked to submit some personal information, your address, and everything else. If you want to double check your online registration, you can check it at voterlookup.ohiosos.gov. So that's how you can double check to see if you're registered and what address you're registered at to make sure that that is all up to date. And you can use that lookup whether you've used the paper form or the online registration form. So if you're registering by paper in Ohio, we want to identify just a couple key pieces of this form because there are a variety of registrations that actually get invalidated due to lack of improper filling this out. So your name is going to go across this section, and then there's going to be an option. It's going to ask you to fill out your address. It is important to note that says county and not country. There's a variety of, or a lot of people every time we do this that put in the US or USA there. They're asking for the county of your address. It'll ask for your birthday, your driver's license or social security number information, an optional phone number. We highly recommend putting this in there because if there is an issue with your registration form, the Board of Elections will call you to follow up about it to make sure that you get it filled out completely and correctly so you're not just waiting and wondering. You only need to fill out this section here if you're changing your name, so not something that most people need to worry about, or if you're changing your address and you needed to use the paper form. And then finally, you got to sign it and you got to date it. I know that that seems pretty straightforward, but we lost actually 1,000 absentee ballots in Ohio in the primaries due to lack of signature. So we're really stressing signatures on all forms where there's a signature line, and then be really paying attention to anytime you're looking at a date, is it today's date or is it your birthday, and really reading that very carefully. And again, same information about the voter lookup information. In case you haven't heard me say these dates enough times so far, November 3rd is that next general election to be considering, and that deadline to register is October 5th. If you wanted to register in other states, that's also great. You can check out your state Secretary of State website to get registered to vote. Many states do online voter registration. That October 5th deadline is not true for all states. In fact, we're one of the earliest voter registration deadlines in the country. So you can also double check your voter registration deadline for those states. You can use our online platform, osu.turbovote.org or vote.org, to access voter registrations in all states. But really important to pay attention to: what is the voter registration deadline? What is the deadline to request an absentee ballot? The election date is going to be the same, and then deadline to mail your absentee ballot. And Kyle is right. Check your voter registration now. Get registered if you aren't already now. This is not a time to be deadline driven. We want to get that in early and fast and make sure that it is all accurate. Also want to talk about the difference between the different ways of voting. So in-person, early voting, and vote by mail. So first things first, where should you go and when? I already mentioned that election calendar. This is where you can go to access it. So sos.state.oh.us/publications. Super trendy. They do not have a cute little quick link for that. But if you just Google Ohio election calendar, it'll take you straight there. And then also double check your polling location. If you do not vote at your designated polling location, you're going to be asked to cast a provisional ballot, which means that your vote may or may not be counted. The Ohio Union is actually the #1 source of provisional ballots in Franklin County. So we really want to make sure that we're working down that number and that you're voting at your correct polling location. You can find that at that voterlookup.sos.gov. Again, the same place that you were looking up your registration information. And then make sure that you have proper ID. This ID is true whether you're voting in person on election day or voting early, which we'll talk about in just a second, but there are a variety of forms of ID you can use in Ohio. Your statement of account from your university is really an important option for you, and this applies for students who are out-of-state students who are registering in Franklin County. This would be one of your best bets. So that's off of your Buckeye link. You can print that out, and if you need information about how to get that printed out, you can ask OSU Votes. An unexpired Ohio driver's license, although there is a caveat to that. They have given an extension on the expiration dates because the BMVs were closed for a while. So it is important to make sure that you pay attention to where you are in that expiration date, but in general, an unexpired driver's license or military ID, an original copy of a current utility bill or current bank statement that lists your address. For all of those things like your statement of account, your utility bill, your bank statement, it's important to note those need to be physical paper copies, so you cannot pull it up on your phone at the polling location. You need to have it printed out and ready for you. So let's talk about early voting, shall we? So in Ohio, early voting begins the day after registration closes. So that is October 6th this year. To vote early, and voting early looks a lot like it does on election day. The differences are you're going to go to the Board of Elections in the county you're registered in, and it's going to happen between October 6th and November 2nd. So this is a really good option if you like to vote in person, but maybe you're worried about the polling sites being really busy on election day, or you're trying to avoid bigger crowds because of COVID-19. Early voting is a great option. The hours are listed on the Ohio Secretary of State's website for all early voting sites. And then the third method of voting is vote absentee or vote by mail. I'm going to use those phrases sort of interchangeably. Ohio is sort of rebranding our absentee voting to vote by mail, although there are some differences depending on state to state. But this is when you are receiving a ballot in the mail and then mailing it back. And in Ohio, absentee voting begins the day after the close of voter registration. So again, October 6th. Those ballots can be mailed or turned in person to the Board of Elections. I love voting absentee. I spent the first 5 years of my voting life in Oregon where it's all vote by mail. So just got a habit of liking to be able to sit down at my dining room table with my partner and review our ballots and think about what we're going to do, not have a rush. And then I just drop it off at the Board of Elections because I'm there a whole bunch because of my job. But you can register and request your absentee ballot at the same time. So if you needed to submit both of those forms, you can get those submitted at the same time. We want to note, please do not forget to sign your absentee ballot. I know I already stressed this. I'm going to stress it again. And then another just quick fun fact about voting absentee before we jump into the steps of how to do that process. You can have your absentee ballot mailed to whatever mailing address makes sense to you. So you should register at the place that you live, but you can have it mailed to another address. I know that this was something that some people did as they were concerned about if residence halls might be closing. They had it mailed to a friend off campus or to their parents' house, even if they were registering in Franklin County, to make sure that they would have access to that ballot. So in order to vote absentee, you need to complete that absentee ballot request form. You can download it from online, or we have those paper copies available on campus along with all those paper copies of the registration. So same locations that I talked about earlier. You will need to print it, sign it, and then it needs to be submitted to the Board of Elections by noon on Halloween this year. So noon on Halloween is when we need to make sure that that signed absentee ballot request is received at the Board of Elections. You'll then have your absentee ballot mailed to you, and that needs to be returned either by mail or dropped off at the Board of Elections. It needs to be postmarked by the day before the election. So postmarked by November 2nd. In Ohio, you have all the way up until 10 days after the election for it to be received, to be fully counted. So that's November 13th. So we've got two spooky dates to remember for this election. Halloween for the request deadline, and then Friday the 13th is the last day that it can be received by the Board of Elections. And then I like to also show what the absentee ballot request form looks like, in part because sometimes it's hard to know what forms you're looking for unless you've seen an image of it. So that is our absentee ballot request form. It asks for a lot of the same information that the voter registration form does, so I won't go through it quite as much in detail, but I do want to highlight this section 6 talks about what type of election. So you'll need to identify the date of the election, and then if it's a general, a special, or a primary election every time. And then again, sign it and date it. Very important. And yeah, Kyle's making really good points in the chat. You can request your absentee ballot now. I think I submitted mine at the beginning of September, right? So you can request that now. They'll start mailing ballots on the 6th, so that's why we say it starts on the 6th, but you can request it now. And then a couple other absentee facts. You must submit an absentee ballot request for every election separately. So just because you voted absentee previously does not mean they'll have you on record as, oh, this person votes absentee. Your vote will be counted, as I mentioned, as long as it's postmarked by the day before the election, and you can return that ballot in person to your Board of Elections by the end of the day on election day. Do want to note that if you do not vote using that absentee ballot and you decide you want to go vote at your assigned polling location, you're going to have to cast a provisional ballot, which again, we're trying to avoid to make sure that your vote is definitely heard. So some things to consider about COVID-19, right? How has that impacted our election? So vote by mail has never been more important. This means that access to stamps is important. Getting it in the mail as soon as possible is important. Also want to note that Ohio is one of many states who do not request an excuse to vote, or do not require an excuse to vote by mail. As of now, Secretary of State LaRose has not announced any changes to the November election due to COVID-19. I say as of now because we also saw changes all the way up until the day before the primary, but I think they're holding strong on their current plans, which means that no more polling locations should be moving. And then we mentioned this earlier, but Ohio is in a serious need for poll workers. So if you are able to serve as a poll worker in your registered county, we would love to have you do that. You do get paid to be a poll worker too. It is not a volunteer role, so that is nice. A couple other things I want to highlight. The first is the Ohio Safe at Home program. This is a program that was designed, and I'm going to sort of skim through some of these details, to address confidentiality for victims or survivors of domestic violence, stalking, human trafficking, rape, and sexual battery. So those survivors can work through what we consider to be an application assistant, so a designated volunteer or agency, to request a replacement or temporary address so that they do not have their actual address on file with the voting records to protect their anonymity. So if you want more information about the Ohio Safe at Home program or application, how to identify application assistance, that information is right there on the screen, ohiosos.gov, and the Safe at Home program. And then also want to note that voting is still accessible even as a person experiencing homelessness. People experiencing homelessness are eligible to vote in all 50 states. Legally, states must only require people registering to vote to list a place they consider to be their residence or where they sleep at night. So they can't make any laws about what defines a residence. And if a person experiencing homelessness wants to vote, register to vote, they should use a mailing location of a place they can reliably receive mail, like a PO box, a place of worship, or a shelter. So Ohio is considered a state with strict voter ID laws. So a person experiencing homelessness in Ohio who's wanting to vote may need to cast a provisional ballot, but there are steps you can take to ensure that provisional ballot is counted. And then want to quickly highlight what OSU Votes is doing and then save some time for questions at the end. So we have a variety of things that we're doing this year. We are trying to do some physically distant voter registration, so those absentee ballot request forms and registration forms that I've already highlighted, as well as we have some A-frame signs all around campus with the QR codes that'll take you straight to the voter registration. So if you see those, go ahead and give us a shout out because we're happy to have those around campus. We're doing both real-time and recorded workshops, including this Train the Trainer workshop that you're seeing right now. Virtual civic engagement programming. We actually have a program coming up next Wednesday. It is a watch party for a documentary about the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And we'd love to see you all there. And then lots of social media posts, which again, if you have not already followed us, please follow us. We're at OSU Votes on Instagram and at OSU_votes on Twitter. And that's lots of great resources. That is all run by my students and they are much more interesting on social media than I am. So definitely check that out and see what they have going on there. And that is what I have for you. So I wanted to make sure we save time for some questions. So Caitlin, what do we have going on?
Hello, hello. Anyone who has questions for Kyle and or Anna, please feel free to put those in the chat. Kyle, I believe there was a question for you earlier on from Dan. Would you like to address that one now?
Yes, it was a great question from Dan. I believe if I'm scrolling up correctly from a while, the question was about, he's heard that the board is opposed by the local police union. What have been some of the arguments posed against this civilian review board by the police union? You're exactly right. So one of the arguments there is that, and I can't make their arguments, that's on them to make. But in a lot of the discussions and conversations is, we might need reform, but and they're open to the idea of some sort of reform because you need to have some sort of accountability because we continue to see these instances happen. However, they don't believe that it is necessary to have a civilian review board because they think it might be more powerful than it needs to be, and that they're able to handle their decisions internally. Again, I can't make their argument, but what I will say, though, overall, more broadly speaking about these issues, the Civilian Review Board, even if it gets passed in November, it still is subject to the contract negotiation between the City of Columbus and the Fraternal Order of Police. And so that police union, City of Columbus contract is going to be subject to some very intense negotiations. Great question.
I have a follow-up question to that, Kyle. You mentioned that Columbus is one of the few municipalities that does not have something like the Civilian Review Board? Are those relatively in other areas? Is it a relatively newly established concept, or is it something that's been around for a long time?
So some of them have been around for many, many years. Others are newly established. A lot you saw come up during like post-Ferguson, a lot of the conversations there to get more civilian review boards, really making sure that it's robust and things are accountable. But others have been in place for years, but that have high-profile incidences. However, unfortunately, what we see, though, is, again, you could have a civilian review board and still see the types of police violence. And so that's why it's so critical that it is a reactive kind of accountability measure, but you've got to set it up in a way in which it can be proactive to make sure that there's no systematic abuses of power, and that's the independent that it can roll. So great question.
Thank you.
And then I saw a question from Amelia, who posted this earlier and then reposted. So thank you, Amelia. If you vote early at the Board of Elections, that is a valid method of voting. You are not casting a provisional ballot necessarily at the Board of Elections. So it's not that you're not going to your assigned polling location, you're going to the correct Board of Elections to cast that vote early. So please do not worry about that.
And Anna, to that question, right? So what happens when you request your absentee ballot? You get an absentee ballot, but instead of, because we know what happens when you vote on election day, it's provisional, but if you wanted to just go early vote, would you have to bring your absentee ballot with you, or could you vote early on election day even though you had your ballot?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you have received that absentee ballot, you need to cast that absentee ballot. If not, whether you're voting early or voting in person on election day, you will be casting a provisional ballot. So if you receive it and you didn't have a chance to get it in the mail in time, I would recommend dropping it off at the Board of Elections all the way up through the close of election day.
Are there additional questions for either Kyle or Anna? I haven't seen any more come through.
I also just want to give Kyle a huge shout out for fielding about half the questions in the chat as I was talking. So Thanks for that tag team effort there.
Hey, this was fun. Anna, and for everybody, this is the first time I've seen the OSU Votes training. This was incredible. You did an amazing job. I'm really excited. This is good. So you all learned a lot, and I know there's a lot of information, but this is really good.
And Kyle, you've done an amazing job of thanking OSU Votes on our behalf, because yes, they did an amazing job. Anna, you did an amazing job. Kyle, you did an amazing job of sharing with us regarding the local ballot initiative. We know that this is a presidential election year, so there are national initiatives as well as local initiatives that we need to be attentive to and inform ourselves, as Anna said, regarding the positions and be grounded in that. There will be information available. The College of Public Health is going to be emphasizing voting and voter education in our college community as well as in the communities in which we serve and work and study. So this will be ongoing for us. There will be literature available in Coons Hall. There already is. So when you're over in the building, pick things up downstairs. We will be keeping you apprised of other opportunities, and hopefully we'll be doing some additional support and collaborating with OSU Votes. We'll be, Kyle, if there's information that we need regarding other local initiatives that you think we should be aware of, don't hesitate to share them. So Ohio, the 5th of October is an important date because— The 5th of
October, week from Monday.
Week from Monday, so 1 week, folks, very important date. I actually want to reiterate that we will be continuing to do this work. It's not just about the 2020 election, but about empowerment and voter education for our communities who are experiencing disproportionate health issues, including COVID, for the long term. And using our voice through voting is one way to address some of that. I do have one final poll question that I'd like to ask those who are here tonight. So I mentioned at the beginning that in 2016, only 59% of OSU students voted in the presidential election. Please enter the chat and tell me, what do you think that percentage will be for 2020? Amelia says 70. Daniel says 90. Elizabeth 75. Caitlin 75. Teresa Long 75.
Our goal at OSU Votes was 75 based off of a stretch of a 20% increase there. So we're there with y'all. But yes, Divya, 100% hoping for 100%.
I like Divya's perspective as well. 100% would be fantastic. And because
I like that Taylor's going Price is Right rules here and going 76% just to be different.
I think, you know, our values are that education for citizenship, right? So I have one final question, although you don't need to answer it in the poll. But in order for us to get to Taylor's 76% or Divya's 100%, what are you going to do to influence that percentage change? That question is for everyone here this evening. What are you going to do to influence that change? All right. Answer that for yourself. Put a Post-it, write it on a Post-it note, stick it on your mirror, stick it on your desk, wherever you can see it, wherever you can remind yourself of that commitment, please do so. And thank you for all those who are signing up as poll workers. We appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Anna, Kyle. Thank you to Encompass and the Multicultural Public Health Student Organization. Thank you, Caitlin. Everybody go out and vote. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.